Hi, this is Jessica Ackerman here for Module 4 of Critical Review, and in this review I will discuss Gagne's theory of instructivism and the theory of constructivism brought about by the help of Dewey, Piaget, and Vygotsky. Instructivism is a theory that lays out all of the components and conditions that need to be in place in order for meaningful learning to occur. Constructivism is the theory on how learning is obtained through experiences and activities that the learner partakes in. Why, as educators, should we continue to study and research these theories? Educators are constantly tweaking the lesson cycle and its components. The foundation laid by Gagne is an effective one that gives us a baseline for improvement. Additionally, Gagne's hierarchy of cognitive information and scaffolding is also ever-changing and being improved upon in education. The constructivist type of thinking about learning is also widely utilized. However, I do agree with Kuchner, Sweller, and Clark in the O'Donnell article that if this approach is the only one used, it does not provide enough mature, educated guidance for learners in order to learn or master all of the skills that they will need to be successful in the real world. The idea of project-based type learning should be used in conjunction with other research-based teaching strategies. My personal evaluation of instructivism is a good one. I was able to make connections with many aspects of the theory through what I witnessed daily at an elementary school. All 9 events of instruction are elements required in our teachers' weekly lesson plans. Also, many of my own beliefs of important aspects of learning were addressed, such as prior schema needed in order to make connections so that new learning can stick, so to say. In order to ensure that this happens effectively, teachers must scaffold learning accordingly, and attitude or motivation is huge in learning outcomes. Constructivism also has many positive aspects. In my own beliefs, people learn best by doing and by being actively engaged. I also believe a valuable learning experience is to learn from your mistakes. Another aspect of constructivism I encourage when learning is having students be more in charge of their own learning, such as setting goals and monitoring along the way. However, students need guidance in doing this, and students are not always going to be interested in the topics that they must learn, and they have to realize that that's okay, but still know the purpose for learning the skill. I will first start off by explaining Robert Gagne's theory of instructional design, also called instructivism. Gagne's intended purpose for this theory was to simply give educators or leaders in all areas the tools and adequate knowledge of learners to allow the perfect learning activities and environment. Gagne's theory includes 3 major components: 5 major learning outcomes, specific learning conditions for those outcomes to take place, and his 9 events of instruction. Let's take a look at each one, beginning with the 5 learning outcomes. Driscoll calls these 5 learning outcomes the building blocks for instruction. They are verbal information, intellectual skills, cognitive strategies, attitudes, and motor skills. Let's review each one. And as I review, I'll also discuss the learning conditions needed for each, which is the second of the 3 major components of Gagne's theory. First of all, we have verbal information. This is equivalent to declarative knowledge or Bloom's level of knowledge and comprehension. This is basic fact calling. The learner may know information, but not a deep understanding of it. For example, before taking this class, I knew some terms and definitions, but now I have moved beyond verbal information and have a more meaningful understanding through my studies. Next is intellectual skills. This is the hierarchy of learning that takes place through intentional scaffolding, very similar to Bloom's taxonomy. There is some further research I'd like to do on the essential skills mentioned by Driscoll, and I'll discuss this later. Third, we have the cognitive strategies. These reminded me of the self-regulation techniques taught to students to help them become more in charge of their own learning. Then we have attitudes. This closely resembles Keller's motivation theory. And lastly, there's motor skills. If you spend any time at all in an elementary classroom, you will see this at work. This could be as simple as teaching students the correct way to line up and walk in the hall by practicing. It could also be the continual practice of handwriting. This has to do with muscle memory. In order for these 5 outcomes to come about in learners, educators, and leaders must set up the conditions necessary. All 5 outcomes require there to be prior knowledge or schema to build upon and make connections. Some examples include, for verbal and intellectual skills, you cannot overload your learner. You must chunk information into smaller learning goals. This reminds me of teaching a young child math facts or sight words with flashcards. If the child needs to master 50 flashcards, you don't start with all 50. You master 5 and then you add a few until you reach your goal. With cognitive strategies, teachers should have students apply or demonstrate their knowledge in their own way or their own words. These 2 strategies can be put into place to set students up for success with learning attitudes. Leaders can model appropriate behavior and attitudes and also set a student up for success, which is very similar to Keller's motivation theory and of behavior reinforcement. Lastly, there's motor skills, and motor skills are developed in conditions where students can practice small steps leading up to the end goal. For example, learning to type. You start with small chunks, like the home row, and then you move on to putting the small pieces together to make a whole. Now moving on to the last of the 3 major components of instruction, the 9 events of instruction. This is simply a lesson cycle. We use this cycle in our own school today. We have a few things added to it, but this is the foundation of our lesson cycle. Number 1 is gaining attention. We call this the hook or the anticipatory set, but this also refers to keeping focus throughout the lesson through voice inflection, sounds, visuals, or other techniques. Number 2 is informing the learner of the objective. This was one of our focuses at our school last year, and I will discuss my need for additional research shortly. Number 3, simulating recall of prior learning. This is our review section of our lesson plan, where we may review from day before, the week before, or the year before. And then number 4, presenting the stimulus. This is our direct teach section, where the students receive most of their new information. Number 5 is providing the learner guidance. This is guided practice that could look very different in different lessons depending on many variables, such as the learner, the objective, prior knowledge, or the level of mastery that is needed. Number 6 is eliciting performance. This is our independent practice, where students show what they've learned and can apply independently. Number 7 is providing feedback to students verbally, one-on-one, in a group, or as a grade. And number 8 is assessment. This is where our curriculum-based assessments, unit quizzes, and checkpoints come in. And lastly, enhancing retention and transfer. Can the students apply the learned skills in real-world or simulated situations? Now let's go over the theory of constructivism. Objectivism and constructivism are similar in the sense that both theories conclude that learners gain knowledge through experiences. The 2 best quotes from Driscoll that helped me better understand constructivism were, "It is the best construction of humankind's experience of its world," found on page 388, and also on page 388 it said, "Learners test their own understandings against those of others, notably those of teachers or more advanced peers to get closer to reality," meaning that the learner's conclusion or gained knowledge from experiences are not always factual or correct, but can be molded by further experiences and questioning. This is what I think of as learning from mistakes or problem-based type learning. Driscoll explains memory like a rhizome model. I actually had to look that up. I wasn't quite sure what that was, so I did a little bit of research. And then later Driscoll also refers to the rhizome model as spaghetti, how it's never ending. So the memory is never ending and it's constantly making new connections. The constructivist theory has its own learning goals that are sequenced similar to Gagne's hierarchy. There's problem solving, reasoning, critical thinking, and active and reflective use of knowledge. In this theory, students choose what they want to research or learn. Prior schema or essential skills needed to learn these things are not necessarily taken into account in their initial planning. Driscoll states that the necessary scaffolding is there for support when and if the learner requires it. The O'Donnell article, however, does go into detail about how scaffolding does take place when it happens and when it's needed. The constructivist theory also has conditions for learning. One condition for learning in the constructivist theory is social negotiation. The idea behind this is being that people learn more by working together and having meaningful conversations. This reminds me of our PLC time for teachers during the school day. The idea is that there will be better teachers through collaboration with other professionals. A second condition for learning is to embed students in real-world learning environments where learners can solve complex problems by applying learned skills. O'Donnell states that this environment is beneficial through collaboration with others and can also raise the sense of group efficacy by being successful at solving a real-world problem together. A third condition is having students attack learning in multiple ways. Examples could be, instead of just answering questions about a problem, students could actually come up with the questions, or students could look at a reading passage through the lens of a different character. According to the constructivist theory, students should take ownership of their own learning by deciding what they want to learn and setting their own goals. And lastly, students should be aware of their own thinking and how the new memories are made through experiences and experimenting and asking questions.